Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is April 24th, 2017. Show's being recorded on the 23rd due to logistical reasons. It's the closest I could get it to the actual show airtime, but there's a lot going on in the world. The last 2 weeks since we've done the show, there's been massive moves in terms of U.S. military aggression across the world. Not just in Syria, not just in North Korea, but now with Iran as well. A third world war is still brewing, to say the least, and I think what we're witnessing now is the death throes of the empire. We're now in the position that so many empires have been in before, which is simply a massive military push across the world in several different directions all at the same time, as the rug gets pulled out from under us here at home. And we're seeing that now with one of the last phases of total economic collapse being the retail apocalypse. And that is happening now as well. The Fed is raising interest rates. It's going to be very rough and rocky over the next few years. And as in all empires, as they collapse, you will see a power struggle. In terms of the halls of government, you'll see a power struggle inside and outside. You'll see it at the lowest levels. We see riots and flash mobs. That's something else I'm going to get into as well. But let's try to focus on the current events overseas right now in terms of Syria and North Korea and Iran, and then perhaps we'll get back to the domestic issue and the issues of empire. Before I do, however, I'd like to remind you that you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at ucy.tv. The show's personal webpage is ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. You can find the archives there. You can find the chat room, links to my more recent articles. You'll find all kinds of information there. Of course, activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, arrowofwisdom.org, sites that I write for on a regular basis, and brandonturbeville.com. This is the show, this is the website that you need to be going to. You'll find the show there, the archive versions as they're posted up, the audio file on YouTube videos. You'll find interviews that I've done, including the one that I did yesterday with Flow of Wisdom with Sean Anthony on GCN. And you'll find all the books there. All the articles are posted there. All of the relevant information is there. BrandonTurbeville.com. That's where you need to be going. So let's take a quick look at what's happening overseas. And this massive push, this aggressive military push by the United States. Back on April the 8th, I believe that is the correct date, we have the Trump administration, after already warning North Korea not to engage in any more nuclear tests. Of course, a couple of days later, the United States engaged in its own nuclear test. But this is, of course, the American prerogative to determine what every nation does all across the planet. The world government apparently is seated in Washington, D.C., if you would believe the rhetoric coming out of the United States government. We had North Korea defying the United States again, and this was a few days after the North Koreans tested a pathetic missile. It only traveled 36 miles before it dropped into the ocean. The U.S. government, of course, started acting as if North Korea had all but declared war on the United States, and it sent a Navy strike group allegedly to the Korean Peninsula. And these were the headlines that we were getting. It says a U.S. Navy strike group will be moving toward the western Pacific Ocean near the Korean Peninsula as a show of force, a U.S. official told Reuters on Saturday, as concerns grow North Korea's advancing weapons program. Earlier this month, North Korea tested a liquid-fueled Scud missile which only traveled a fraction of its range. The strike group, called Carl Vinson, includes an aircraft carrier and will make its way from Singapore toward the Korean Peninsula, according to the official, who is not authorized to speak to the media and requested anonymity. We feel the increased presence is necessary, the official said, citing North Korea's worrisome behavior. It was, of course, the Carl Vinson carrier. It was joined by 3 guided missile destroyers, USS Wayne E. Meyer, USS Michael Murphy, and USS Lake Champlain. They had been deployed since January 5th, according to the U.S. 3rd Fleet. They have about 6,500 sailors on board. It was scheduled to visit Australia next, and of course that's where they ended up. So the strike group was sent, and then we have somewhat of a response by the Russians, right? We have the Russians, after the Tomahawk strikes on the Al-Shuaret missile air base in Syria, the Russians eliminated the deconfliction channels between the United States and Russia. They also deployed the Admiral Grigorovich frigate to the Mediterranean. And that ship is supposed to basically position itself between the ships that fired the Tomahawk missiles and Syrian territory. It's also going to visit the Russian logistics base in Tartus. The Russian Defense Ministry also stated that the Syrian air defenses are going to be beefed up as a result of the American aggression. And then we have something that happened not directly in the Syrian theater. Russia announced that it was going to be sending the corvette Boyki and Sobrozitelny. That's a tugboat MB-123 and a tanker Kola of the Baltic Fleet. They're going to be sent to the North Atlantic, and the stated goal of the ship's presence there is for military training. Now, that's possible, but it's also a plausible reason for deployment, a plausible cover for deployment, right? To say that it's military training. This is something we've seen before. In fact, about a year and a half ago, we saw the United States and Russia engaging in military exercises, which were really just troop placement. It was a cover for troop placement in the potential battle between the United States and Russia. So it could be a cover. Now, you would wonder, why is a tugboat going all the way out to the North Atlantic Ocean to be part of military exercises? And I would suggest that perhaps this tugboat, with its ability to pull flat barges and so forth, could be useful as a launch pad from the North Atlantic. So that's something to watch as well. Thankfully, there's cooler heads in Russia than there are in the United States, so we don't expect anything preemptive on their end. But the United States is obviously showing itself to be not only unpredictable, but unhinged. This is even more unhinged than the Obama push for World War III. We're getting in very dangerous territory here, to say the least. Now, we also had a very interesting statement coming out of Russia, with Vladimir Putin actually using the term false flag in relation to Idlib and the possibility for a chemical weapons attack being launched in Syria blamed on the Assad government. Putin announced that Russia has evidence that not only was the recent chemical weapons incident in Idlib a false flag attack, but that another similar incident, I guess we should say, was or is currently being planned. This was back April 11th. It's what he said at a joint press conference in Moscow with Italian President Sergio Mattarella. It says, "We have reports from multiple sources that false flags like this one, and I cannot call it otherwise, are being prepared in other parts of Syria, including the southern suburbs of Damascus. They plan to plant some chemical there and accuse the Syrian government of an attack." He goes on, he says, "President Mattarella and I discussed it, and I told him that this reminds me strongly of the events in 2003, when the U.S. representatives demonstrated at the UN Security Council session the presumed chemical weapons found in Iraq. The military campaign was subsequently launched in Iraq, and it ended with the devastation of the country, the growth of the terrorist threat, and the appearance of the Islamic State on the world stage." We had a separate statement released from the Russian General Staff, which says that terrorists were transporting toxic agents into several locations in Syria. The incident that took place in Idlib has never been fully investigated, and it's clear that the Syrian military did not gas civilians in Khan Sheikhoun. We've covered that here on the show. All the evidence suggests otherwise, that it was the terrorists who either gassed them or at the very least possessed chemical weapons. And the possibility of a false flag chemical attack in Syria is not surprising to those of us who have been covering it. It's happened numerous times throughout the crisis. But what's interesting is that the president of Russia would actually state this much in front of the world, and not only state it in front of the world, and not only state that he has evidence that another false flag attack was being planned in front of the world, but he would do it at a joint press conference with the Italian president. This is very important. So this suggests that an attack like this is imminent, or was imminent. It was imminent enough that he would utter those words in order to, I would imagine, stop it, to put it out there and make it look like the United States, not make it look like the United States, but prevent the United States from doing it, and then basically confirming the Russian intelligence. That being said, just because we're here on April 23rd, 24th, does not mean, and we haven't had another chemical weapons attack, that does not mean that this isn't going to be conducted in the future. In fact, it could have simply delayed the attack itself. Remember, Putin stated this in front of the world. This means everywhere except the United States, Canada, and Western Europe. The Anglo-American territories are insulated from critical thought and from the outside world. It's sort of the Iron Curtain in reverse in terms of information. The United States, the general American population has no idea that Putin said this was a false flag. They have no idea that Putin said that there was another attack being that might be deployed in an imminent fashion. So if the United States does deploy a false flag chemical attack, then yes, maybe Russian citizens would be, curious about it. Maybe people in Eastern Europe, maybe people in the Middle East, in Africa, and places like that. But the United States, we don't have a clue. We don't even know that those words were uttered. And that's what's dangerous, is you have outside of these borders, the rest of the world is on a different page. Inside these borders, for those of my international listeners who are not in the United States, you have no idea how brainwashed this population is right now. I've never seen it worse, and this is not even just complete ignorance, right? This is they're not even brainwashed to the point of being able to oppose something that allegedly is against their own principles, right? We used to say, with a Republican, you get a new war and an anti-war movement. With a Democrat, you just get a new war. Well, now we've got a Republican and a new war, but not a new war, but another war, and we don't have an anti-war movement. What little anti-war movement took place under the Trump administration was a few thousand activists across a country of 300 million people who went out and beat the shit out of each other. Peace activists beating the shit out of each other. Isn't that funny? Antifa and whoever these guys are from the alleged alt-right. I don't quite know who they were, and I don't even like to use that term, alt-right. But these are the people who were allegedly part of the anti-war movement. Basically, they just wanted to go out and fight. So there is no anti-war movement in the United States anymore. And I went on that long tangent to prove to you that if the United States does launch another false flag chemical attack, it will be broadcast on the televisions of Americans, and they'll eat it up. Doesn't matter what Putin says. Doesn't matter what anybody says. The American people are going to eat this up. They're not going to have any clue that this was a false flag attack. These last chemical attacks worked just as well as the incubator babies Americans on the left and right were united. They wanted to go to war. I think maybe Trump let them down with just little pithy Tomahawk missiles that didn't do much damage, but killed some children. So that's something we're really good at here in America. So let's move on. We also saw the activity from the United States. It's not really a new report now, but it was a new report on April 12th from Al-Masdar, shows satellite imagery that was able to capture a large U.S. military convoy making its way from Turkey to Ain al-Arab, or Kobani, in northern Syria, Aleppo province. They were apparently on their way to a newly constructed military base, their new home. The base has not yet been fully completed. It's mostly finished. Satellite imagery taken on April 11th tends to show that. The staffing of an American military base in northern Syria comes a couple of days after 20 U.S. armored vehicles entered Syria from the Jordanian border, which is in southern Syria, which itself only took place a couple of days after the U.S. launched 59 Tomahawk missiles into Idlib at al-Shaarit. So we won't go through over the bombing, but obviously Russia has condemned these acts of U.S. aggression, but that is where we're at now. Now, I did a satire. We won't go over it, but if you have a sense of humor, which apparently most readers don't, you can go to my website. In response to UA incident, Donald Trump orders missile strikes on United Airlines. It's a satire. It's supposed to be humorous. Share it around if you like. Sometimes you can only laugh at these things. Now, I have to address Nikki Haley. Tricky Nikki, as she was known here in South Carolina, where she humiliated our state for many years, for at least 8 years, with her stupidity, her making up facts, alternative facts that she made up about drug tests and people shitting in the State House lawn and so forth. None of it was true, of course. Nobody took a shit on the state capitol lawn. That was something she made up to demonize the Occupy protesters who were there, who were partly protesting her abysmal leadership. The governor, of course, who was the reason why all of us in South Carolina have our Social Security number out there for all to see. It was her government's incompetence that allowed those Social Security numbers to get out there. And then the scam was that the state would pay, with our tax money, of course, for insurance to protect your Social Security number regarding the mistake that the state made. And then after 2 years, you're going to have to pay for it yourself, and it's ridiculously expensive. So it's good work if you can get it, if you're the Social Security secret company that's going to protect your Social Security card, and getting money from lots of willful taxpayers who want to protect their Social Security card, and those who were forced to pay for it anyway via our tax money. So that's just some of the legacy that Nikki Haley left with us. The comment about the state capitol, she claimed that Occupy protesters who were on the State House grounds were they were disgusting. They were going out and they were literally shitting in the bushes out at the state capitol. And it's not true. No evidence of that. They even had, I think there may have even been porta potties out there, but there's no evidence of that. She just said it, and it was proven false, and that doesn't matter. The Occupy protesters were gone soon enough. And then, of course, the nuclear plant. She said that there were so many, that drugs were such a problem that I think it was in Aiken, there was a nuclear plant there, I believe, where they had so many people applying for a job and then failing the drug test that they couldn't get good employees because so many people were failing the drug tests. Not true. Not true at all. The people who were in charge of hiring said that they didn't have anybody fail the drug test, or very few amount of people failing the drug test, and they don't even know why she said it. And her defense, get this, her defense was, I guess, I used to think you could believe anything people told you, but now I don't think that's the case. So that's your UN ambassador. Once again, I find myself apologizing to the world for giving you something that we produced here in South Carolina. We got Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley. I don't know what else to. Maybe we should just stop voting here. I don't know, because it's pretty awful what we're doing to the rest of the world. Now, if you want to see, it's ironic to me that we have a guy who campaigned on America First groveling before Israel, right? America First, and apparently what's really meant is Israel first, America second. So we get sloppy seconds. When you want to see someone humiliating the United States, don't look at Obama and the Iranian nuclear deal. That's because that's what's being pushed by the Republican crowd now and Donald Trump. That was only humiliating to the United States in the fact that the United States apparently believes that it can force other people not to have a nuclear power program simply because of Israeli and American geopolitical interests. That was not weakness at all. Weakness is Nikki Haley's performance before AIPAC, the American Israeli Political Action Committee, and where she goes before this crowd of rabid Zionists, and she proclaims all the horrors visited upon this Zionist settler state under Obama, as well as all the United States has done to support Israel since Trump came to power. In other words, she set up a perfect representation of the narrative that existed all along. Despite the fact that Obama was an unwavering supporter of Israel, despite that he gave them historical amounts of money and assistance, pledging loyalty to them, actively helping to destroy Israel's self-made enemies, Obama is still considered a weak supporter of Israel because it's all part of the narrative. Now, what's funny, Haley says that she doesn't wear heels for the fashion statement. She wears them so if she sees something wrong, I'm going to kick them every single time. That's what Nikki Haley has to say. Well, obviously, she doesn't understand the expression, right? Heels are not supposed to actually mean high heel shoes. They're supposed to be her feet, and that's Nikki Haley at her intellectual finest. She was referring, of course, to even the slightest amount of criticism of Israel for murdering Palestinians, for stealing their land, or generally starting aggressive wars across the Middle East. Her entire speech was littered with literal groveling at the foot of AIPAC and Israel. The woman could barely control the look on her face, which just reeked of a desire for approval. The entire speech, she had a look on her face that just screamed, "Do you like what I'm saying? Did I do good? Should I turn it up a notch? Would you like me to do anything else, sir? Please, may I have another?" She was pathetic. Humiliation of the United States. Absolute humiliation. You want to see the opposite of America First? You want to see really looking weak in front of the rest of the world? This is it. It's disgusting. Her behavior and her talk was absolutely disgusting. Now, I just want to read a few quotes here. She referred to Israel as America's #1 democratic friend in the Middle East. She warned the United Nations and other participants in the UN Security Council. Let me give you a selection of the comments here so you can see, so you don't have to watch it yourself unless you just want to induce vomiting. We have her claims that the United Nations engages in Israel bashing because some countries would dare to condemn land stealing, racism, terrorism, military aggression, murder, etc. She says, I was confused. It was totally bizarre because in my first month talking about the Middle East, there's a lot to talk about. And whether you're talking about Hezbollah or ISIS, all the issues in Syria, which is a problem, that's what I expected us to talk about. I didn't expect an Israel bashing session, and literally listening to each member say the same thing over and over again. I knew they said it was bad, but until you hear it and you see it, You just can't comprehend how ridiculous it is. All right. Then we have the hysterics over the Iran deal. It's concerning, and the reason it's concerning is because when the Iran deal took place, all it did was empower Iran, and it empowered Russia, and it emboldened Iran to feel like they could get away with more. You can put sanctions on a country. To take sanctions away, it's very hard to go back and put sanctions back on. So what we have said is we're going to watch them like a hawk. We're going to make sure that every single thing they do is watched, processed, and dealt with. But my concern is you're seeing a lot of love for the Iran deal in the Security Council, and that's unfortunate. And why that was ever allowed to go through, why that was ever passed, is beyond me. I mean, it's terrible. Okay, so we see some Donald Trump-esque articulation. Now let's look at the statement she has about Israel bashing. This is what she says. You know, basically what it comes down to is I'm not there to play, and what I wanted to make sure of was the United States started leading again, and leading isn't saying and doing things when it's comfortable. Leading is saying and doing things when it's not comfortable. So the goal was to have the backs of our allies, never again do what we saw happen with Resolution 2334, and make anyone question our support. When Resolution 2334 happened and the U.S. abstained, the entire country felt a kick in the gut. We had just done something that showed the United States at its weakest point ever. Never do we not have the backs of our friends. We don't have a greater friend than Israel. And to see that happen was not only embarrassing, it was hurtful. And so what I can tell you is that everyone at the United Nations is scared to talk to me about Resolution 2334. And I wanted them to know that. Look, that happened, but it will never happen again. There's diplomacy, right? When you have other diplomats scared to talk to you. Awesome. So to answer the question on what we can do at the UN, we can do a lot. The power of your voice is an amazing thing. It's the power of their pocket and their intelligence connections. So one, changing the culture of the UN is very important. And the way you change the culture of the UN is the United States tells them what we're not going to put up with. We start to change the culture to what we should be talking about, and then we actually act on what we say. I wear heels. It's not for a fashion statement. It's because if I see something wrong, we're going to kick them every single time. So how are we kicking? We're kicking by, number one, putting everybody on notice, saying that if you have our back, we're going to have the backs of our friends, but our friends need to have our back too. If you challenge us, be prepared for what you're challenging us for, because we will respond. This is like the WWE of diplomacy here. The next thing we did was, and we said, the days of Israel bashing are over. We have a lot of things to talk about. There are a lot of threats to peace and security, but you're not going to take our number one democratic friend in the Middle East and beat up on them. And I think that's what you're seeing, is they're all backing up a little bit. The Israel bashing is not as loud. They didn't know exactly what I meant outside of giving the speech, so we showed them. So yeah, let's go on to how she showed them. She proudly proclaimed that the United States had a Palestinian man fired from his post simply for being Palestinian. That's how she showed them. Remember, the United Nations, who cried about racism at every occasion, obviously kept silent on this guy's removal, even though he was fired for being Palestinian. They just went along for the ride. So obviously, in such utopias, some people are more equal than others. But she admitted it. I mean, this is what she says. So when they decided to try and put a Palestinian in one of the highest positions that had ever been given at the UN, we said no, and we had him booted out. That doesn't mean he wasn't a nice man. That doesn't mean he wasn't good to America. What it means is, until the Palestinian Authority comes to the table, until the United Nations responds the way they're supposed to, there are no freebies for the Palestinian Authority anymore. Doesn't mean he wasn't a nice man. Doesn't even mean that he wasn't good to America. He was Palestinian. He wasn't the special gene pool. He wasn't chosen, so he had to go. She also had a lot of horror at the fact that anybody would dare compare Israel, the precious chosen Israel, to an apartheid state. She acted as if that was ridiculous. She said, so they tested us again, and a ridiculous report, the fault report, came out. I don't know who the guy is or what he's about, but he's got serious problems. I'm sorry, this is just so stupid. Goes and compares Israel to an apartheid state, so the first thing we do is we call the Secretary General and say, this is absolutely ridiculous. You have to pull it. The Secretary General immediately pulled the report, and then the director has now resigned. This is great. This is wonderful. I personally love saying, I don't know who this guy is or what he's about. That's great. That's because you're a dumbass, Nikki. You don't know who anybody is, or you probably think apartheid is a half-tied knot or something. I don't know. Just a total moron. So, comparing Israel, a state that doesn't allow intermarriages between Palestinians and Jews, a state that literally has people in ghettos and cages, a state that literally randomly fires on people just for the hell of it, a state that is the most racist in the world, a state that routinely attacks its neighbors. I could go on and on. That's not an apartheid state. Well, yeah, I agree. That is absolutely ridiculous. But I love the way she's openly admitting to the world that the United States kind of just goes in and does what it wants. We don't know who this guy is, but he's got serious problems. I guess so. If you don't know anything about him, he's obviously got serious problems. All right, so she's upset also about the BDS movement. The very concept of boycotting the Zionist settler state was inconceivable to her. She says she attempted to use her questionable record, I add questionable in, as the South Carolina governor, as a plus to sell herself to the audience. I mean, they only have to come down here and see what a great state we're in, and of course to the people that she's speaking to, low wages, poverty, third world level poverty, horrible education standards would probably seem like a plus. So I guess she's touting her record to the right people. I think we have to show how absurd it is. We have to basically show, just in common sense terms, if you want to boycott North Korea, I get it. If you have divestments and pull away from Syria, do it. We've got sanctions on Syria, dumbass. We don't have divestments in Syria. We can't because of your president and the one before it. If you want to talk about other issues that we're dealing with, I can understand that. But Israel? And number one, I appreciate all the support and kindness and everything that you've given to me. But all I did was tell the truth. And if you want to continue to support me, which I greatly appreciate, understand that by telling the truth and showing the power of your voice and putting action behind it, there's nothing we can't change. So with the BDS movement that we were able to stop in South Carolina, we're going to continue to take that to the United Nations and make sure that they understand that is not what we need to be focused on. Well, it wasn't really a big fight in South Carolina. Unfortunately, we're, with the right-wing Christian contingent here, she's got plenty of rabid Israel idiots to follow her and fight the horrible BDS movement. So, in other words, we can sanction anybody. You want to sanction North Korea? You want to sanction Russia? You want to boycott these other countries? That's all fine. But not Israel. No, not Israel. No, we have to keep pumping a lot of money into that. This was absolutely humiliating. The UN needs to know there's a new sheriff in town. Well, not really. Just there's an orange sheriff in town, less articulate, less predictable, I guess, but not really a new sheriff. It was a display of the most submissive behavior that an American official could ever engage in before a professional public audience. If we didn't look weak before Haley took the stage, we look weak now. Now, I could go on and on about Israel, right, and the U.S.-Israeli relationship, but I know a lot of people, a lot of my listeners, I'm going to get nasty emails tomorrow for saying this, but I don't personally believe that Israel is the dominant member of our relationship. It's just a cog in a much bigger wheel designed to do just what it's doing today. It's caused chaos and disintegration in the Middle East and provide another justification for a bigger conflict that involves the rest of the world. And remember, the first British Governor General of the Palestinian territory, he was Sir Ronald Storrs, and he wrote this in his book. The title escapes me right now, but he wrote this in his book, and he described Israel as a little Jewish Ulster in the Middle East. and said that it would stir up racial and ethnic and national tensions and religious tensions in the region and serve as pretext for greater Western involvement at a future date. It's nothing more than a forward operating base for not just Western imperial powers, but for a worldwide corporate banking elite that back not only the West, but most other countries in the world. It's a forward operating base. And it should be abundantly clear to everybody who's not blinded by religious fanaticism that it's time for the U.S.-Israeli love affair to be ended. America first is a good slogan, but it's only a good slogan if it's put into practice. Israel first will undoubtedly destroy the United States, and it might destroy much of the rest of the world before everything is said and done. It's time to break up with Israel. It's just not working out. Now, we can talk about the other chemical weapons that were involved, that took place in Deir el-Zor. And if you didn't hear about the chemical weapons in Deir el-Zor, that's because the media didn't report it, because the United States was the offending party. We have the Syrian government reporting that on April 14th, I believe, that the United States struck a weapons depot in Deir el-Zor that caused a large plume of yellow smoke, an indication of the presence of chemical weapons. Syrian military stated to Russia's Sputnik website, the jets of the so-called U.S.-led coalition launched a strike about 17:30 to 17:50 local time on a Daesh warehouse where many foreign fighters were present. First a white cloud and then a yellow one appeared at the site of the strike, which points at the presence of a large number of poisonous substances. A fire at the site continued until 22:30. The General Staff, Syria's General Staff, stated the U.S. strike killed hundreds of people, including civilians, that hundreds of people were poisoned by the gas that was released as a result of the strike. This confirms that Daesh and al-Nusra terrorists possess chemical weapons and are capable of using, obtaining, and transporting it. U.S. denied bombing the weapons depot. Colonel Dorian denied it, spokesman for the United States. And no doubt there was silence. Many of you are going to be hearing this information for the first time. So more beautiful babies killed by the Trump administration. So only beautiful babies killed by others can be used as justification, I suppose, for open warfare. Maybe we should talk about the bus bombing, because that was the big headlines in Kafaya and Fua. This was a suicide bombing on several buses that were leaving Kafaya and Fua. These are government-held towns. They're surrounded by terrorists. There was an agreement. They called this the Four Cities Agreement. It was between the between the Syrian government and the Western-backed terrorist forces that would have allowed for the evacuation of civilians to Syrian government territory, or terrorists and their families to terrorist-held territory. It's being called a population swap. It's not really a population swap. It's a way to save the lives of civilians who will be beheaded and tortured and murdered by the monkeys that the West fund, and also to allow the terrorists and their Congress to get to terrorist-held areas. So basically it's a way to empty these certain areas of civilians so that when the fight starts back, it's going to be between the Syrian government and the Western-backed terrorists, and nobody gets caught in the crossfire. So it's a good thing. And the more terrorists that are, brought into the same general areas, the better, because then it's easier to bomb them. The other villages were in the terrorist-held area. This was Zabadani and Madaya. Remember, Madaya was this place where people were starving. They showed these starving people in Madaya, and of course it was because the terrorists would not allow them food. Blamed on the Syrian government, of course. Again, the plan is there to minimize civilian casualties and eliminate the necessity to really reclaim territory by isolated by opposing forces. and the concentrate forces. So this plan was actually facilitated by both Iran and Qatar. Qatar is somewhat more reasonable than Saudi Arabia. But there was about 126 people who were killed in the attacks, about 80 children, more beautiful babies, didn't get really condemned by the orange parakeet. But this was even confirmed by the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. This was, of course, the pro-terrorist Abdul Rahman, who is this one guy in England. 68 children, 126 people. BBC reports slightly different numbers, but we get the idea. What essentially happened is that as civilians were being loaded up into the buses, the terrorists actually came to the areas and lured children and others onto the buses with potato chips. They're starving, remember, so potato chips are not quite as plentiful there as they are here right now. So they're hungry, they're kids who love snacks, and they lured them onto the green buses where they then blew it up. And I have friends in Syria right now, and I can show you the pictures that they took after having visited this area where the bombs went off. And you can see that the bombs had been blown up, and you can still see the bags of potato chips and the candy that was there to lure the children in. There's actually, I've got a video in my article here where this woman didn't trust them. And she said that she thought something was very funny about it, so she wouldn't let her kids go take candy from strangers. And then she saw the bus blow up after all these people got on it. Now, what's funny is that media outlets like the BBC is even trying to suggest that it was the Assad government that bombed these buses. This is ridiculous. It's a suicide bombing. Since when has the Syrian military ever used suicide bombings? That's a hallmark of the Western-backed terrorists. Why would they bomb their own people? These are considered Assad loyalists, right? These are the kufr that the terrorists would call them. These are the horrible Assad people, the loyalists that the Western media will refer to as if they are terrorists. So, but why would Assad bomb them? So he agrees to a population swap, sends in buses to get them, and then bombs them. Then he has someone suicide bomb them. Why? That doesn't make any sense at all. What planet would that make any sense? I would recommend that you follow Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett on these issues, especially stuff that is coming out in real time. thewallwillfall.org and ingaza.wordpress.com. Please find them on social media. They're on Facebook, where they're very active. We can get the up-to-date stuff. And it looks like the terrorist organization that bombed those people was Ahrar al-Sham. By the way, Ahrar al-Sham is considered moderate terrorists by the United States, vetted nicely. We have, let's see, some more reports here. Just give me a second to find what I want to read to you in regard to this report. And this is by Eva Bartlett, and I've linked to her article in mine, and I highly encourage you to go check it out. She says, a journalist with U News who sent photos and videos of the massacre of civilians asked the anguished rhetorical question one asks in such repeated situations. Where are the mainstream media? Why don't they report the barbaric and cowardly terrorist attack on Fua and Kafraya? The answer is that the genuine torment these civilians have endured for years will never be fairly reported. It does not serve the agenda of demonizing the leader of Syria and the National Army in order to win Western public opinion for yet another humanitarian intervention, which destroys the Syrian nation and installs chaos in the place of the legitimate government. None of the people terrorized by these mercenaries of the NATO Zionist Gulf Turkish alliance over the years will be respected or recognized by the Western press, be they women and children, victims of rocket attacks, sniping, and mortar terrorism in and around Damascus, Syrian and Allied journalists assassinated by the moderates, civilians of Aleppo for years bombed, sniped at, and besieged by terrorist factions, or especially liberated civilians from eastern areas of Aleppo whose horrific testimonies directly negate the myth of rebels, moderates, or the falsity of Assad as the problem and Syrian army as the aggressor. As with civilian victims of suicide bombs in Beirut and Homs, Jobla and Tartus, which I visited in July 2016, the civilians of Fua and Kofraya are rendered by the Western corporate media as either invisible or sect not worthy of human consideration. Ironically, while Fua and Kofraya may contain a predominant number of Shia Muslims, residents of the villages have told me how they intermarried with their neighboring Sunni Syrians and shared the celebrations of other faiths, as is common in secular Syria. She goes on. The Western corporate media is reporting on massacres like the recent suicide bombings of several buses full of civilians in Syria deserves some scathing critique. Consider these lines from an article by Lizzie Dearden from the UK Independent. A car bomb has hit a convoy of buses carrying civilians evacuated from besieged towns in Syria, killing at least 24. The blast hit the Rashidin area on the outskirts of Aleppo, where dozens of buses carrying mostly Shia Muslim families from pro-government villages were waiting to enter the Syria. Photos that were too graphic to publish showed a huge fire raging next to bodies scattered on the ground next to charred buses with blown-out windows, including those of children. Now, if the area in question was a terrorist-occupied area, Dearden's report would read something like this. A regime-dropped barrel bomb has killed a convoy of buses carrying innocent civilians, mostly women and children, who were being evacuated from rebel areas of Syria. The deadly 8.2 magnitude Hiroshima barrel bomb hit Sunni Muslim families from freedom-loving rebel areas, etc., etc. Do note in the reporting of journalists like Dearden and other prostitutes the downplaying of actual documented Syrian civilian deaths at the hands of terrorists dubbed rebels. Do note the sectarian language rejected by most Syrians. Do note the implication that acts of terrorism on Syrians in government-secured areas of the country must be considered as not credible, but physics-defying alleged school bombings or alleged chemical weapons attacks should be believed. Also note the kind of reporting this attack that was produced by CNN, while stating that no group has claimed responsibility. CNN felt the need to get a word from that paragon of immorality, Abdul Rahman of the utterly discredited Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. During a televised interview, Rami Abdul Rahman, director of the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, said that a suicide bomber claimed he was carrying food items and blew himself up in a fuel station. Abdul Rahman said he doesn't believe the Syrian regime is behind the attack. He said the regime kills scores of people daily using all types of weaponry and doesn't need to kill its own sympathizers. Yes, indeed, just in case you were distracted by the U.S.-backed terrorist bombing of buses full of civilians, CNN used the pathetic, quizzling Rahman to remind you all the evils of the Assad regime and to admit that despite the evil of Assad, he has not yet found a need to kill his own sympathizers. Regarding the photos that were too graphic to publish by The Independent, please explain to the families of these mutilated Syrians why their graphic murders were too distasteful to Western sensitivities when graphic images of dead and injured children are splashed across Western media broadsheets when the alleged author of such attacks is the Syrian or Russian military. Britain's state-owned BBC, no stranger to the propagation of war porn when it serves the NATO agenda, headlined rather blandly, Syria war, huge bomb kills dozens of evacuees in Syria. Had the bombing in question been attributed to the Syrian army or Russians, you can bet the headline would have read something like, murderous regime bombs innocent civilians in rebel-held area just days after worst chemical attack in the history of the world. Of course, I do not believe for a moment that the allegations of the Western-propagated Idlib chemical incident are true. But this is the sort of headline the Western corporate media runs, irrespective of actual evidence, of which they have none as regards the alleged chemical attack in Khan Sheikhoun. Please recall that just days after the U.S.-led coalition murdered anywhere between 60 and 80 Syrian soldiers in Deir el-Zor, Western governments, their jihadi proxies, and the Western press deflected attention by attacking a UN humanitarian convoy and blaming Syria and or Russia. So I'm not going to go any further. Her article's fairly long, and I definitely encourage you to go read it. So please do that. It's linked in my article. Now we've got, of course, just a couple more minutes. So I want to mention another provocation, another expansion of the U.S. war effort. We have a report coming from Voice of America. So this is an American propaganda outlet. Dozens of American soldiers are now being deployed to Mogadishu, Somalia, to train and equip the AMISOM forces, right? This is the African Union mission in Somalia, and they are supposed to be fighting extremism there. The troops are going to now mark the first presence of American military forces in Somalia, other than a few counterterrorism advisors. And the most notable involvement that we had there was in 1994 when the U.S. pulled out of the UN intervention operation. This was 5 months after we had 18 U.S. Special Forces personnel being killed in battle with Somali militiamen that inspired Black Hawk Down, for those of you who like movies. We have U.S. Africa Command spokesman Pat Barnes saying United States Africa Command will conduct various security cooperation and or security force assistance events in Somalia in order to assist our allies and partners. Now, they're not engaged in the same mission as before. This is one of advising as opposed to the peacekeeping mission, and it's not a violation of international law if they have been invited in, unlike in Syria. But it does represent one more instance of expanding American military involvement across the world. So troops now in Somalia. Trump finally got his special one. That one in North Korea will be his. So let's see. North Korea. What do we have with North Korea? I should mention that as well. We have North Korean Vice Foreign Minister Hong Song-ryol remaining defiant, saying that we'll be conducting more missile tests on a weekly, monthly, and yearly basis. Said the United States attempts a military solution, then North Korea will respond with a nuclear preemptive strike, and all-out war will ensue. We have, according to Fox News, North Korea's Deputy UN Ambassador Kim In-ryong saying during a news conference that the U.S. was turning the Korean Peninsula, into the world's biggest hotspot, creating a dangerous situation in which a thermonuclear war may break out at any moment. So, we finally done it. We finally sunk so low as a country as to make possibly the most ruthless dictator in the world actually become the good guy in a confrontation between our country and his. Congratulations, America. We have lowered the bar so low that we've now had to dig a hole to put the bar in. Congratulations. At least we're first in something. So who really, though, could blame North Korea for continuing to build a nuclear arsenal? Not a fan of nuclear weapons by any means, but the United States has one, and it's the biggest threat to world security and national sovereignty and freedom and democracy in the world today. Israel has one, and it's common Israeli practice to bomb its neighbors. So it appears that the only thing that empowers a nation to act with impunity against other countries, and the only thing that protects it from being acted against with impunity, is a nuclear arsenal. And that's only assuming that if the aggressing parties aren't completely insane, which is not something we should be betting on. And of course, never one to de-escalate the situation. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has also stated, quote, all options are on the table, and he says, for more than 2 decades, the United States and our allies have worked to peacefully dismantle North Korea's nuclear program and alleviate the suffering of their people. But every step of the way, North Korea answered our overtures with willful deception, broken promises, and nuclear missile tests. Oh, isn't that funny? China now is apparently willing to play ball with the U.S. They've reportedly begun preparing to deal with the aftermath of a major U.S. strike against North Korea. It's put its troops on alert, placed a large number of them on the border with North Korea. We have reports coming from mainstream sources indicating the U.S. military is looking at a variety of options that include a military strike, shooting down missiles, or even the remote chance of continuing the current policy that we have. Rest assured, though, that we won't be informed of it until afterwards. We can't also ignore the fact that North Korea has been employed as a useful pawn in the Western strategy of tension for quite some time. It constantly serves as the ability to provide a distraction for Western governments and mainstream media outlets till a more pressing issue is passed into the obscurity of American attention span. So it doesn't last long, 2 days tops. The U.S. bombs some babies, or we make a huge, horrible foreign policy decision or a trade deal, and then all of a sudden, North Korea is shaking its fist and saying that it's going to bomb the Western Hemisphere, even though it can't get a missile 36 miles off its coast. It's going to destroy the world, take over the world, and be Hitler and Stalin and whatever else. And then Americans are hearing nuclear war with North Korea. We are good Americans, so we all lift up our swords and scream and spit blood for 2 days, and then we look at Kim Kardashian's ass for about 24 hours, and then we're on to something else, and nobody even really remembers what we were all so bloodthirsty about 3 days prior. And then, 6 months later, same thing. North Korea wants to nuke everybody, and then we're all screaming bloody murder. 2 days later, it's the Super Bowl. So this could be yet another one of those issues where it's just a deflection from current policy, and so we're using North Korea as the strategy of tension, or this could be the time that they pull the trigger, and because we are seeing the death throes of the American empire now, and seeing America really throw everything against the wall as the rug is getting pulled out from under us. Here at home, we didn't even get to talk about the retail apocalypse. Don't worry, you'll figure that out as it's happening. You don't need me to tell you about that one. So, come to the end of the show tonight. We'll try to pick up on the economic issues next week, and possibly more foreign policy issues if our illustrious elites have not decided to burn us all up in conflagration before then. We'll see. It's their world. We just live in it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Brandon Turbeville. This is Truth on the Tracks. We'll see you next week.
My name is S.M. Gibson, and I am the host of Anti-Legal Radio on UCY.TV